He wasn't supposed to survive. A battle-hardened Marine, broken in body and betrayed by the one person he still trusted. His wife shoved him off a cliff and vanished into the misty silence of Oregon's pine-covered high country. And yet, he lived. Not because of luck. Because of a dog. A German shepherd with scars deeper than skin. A ghost from the battlefield who refused to let his partner die alone. They say loyalty doesn't speak a language. But this one barked, fought, ran through rain, through lies, through every force trying to bury the truth. This isn't just a survival story. It's about a kind of love only God could write, the kind that stares death in the face and doesn't blink. The morning air in the Cascades outside Bend, Oregon was thin and sharp, laced with the scent of pine and the distant promise of rain. Wisps of fog clung to the shadows of towering Douglas firs, stretching pale fingers across the winding gravel path that curled from the back porch of the Walker family lodge to the overlook locals called Widow's Peak. The sun, hesitant in its climb, spilled gold across the tree line. Birds dared to sing. But for Jake Walker, the quiet was a lie. Jake, 33, sat motionless in his motorized wheelchair, wrapped in a thick olive-green military jacket that hung heavy over his lean frame. A black beanie was pulled low over his scar-lined forehead, the most brutal scar jagged from his left temple to just above his cheekbone. A souvenir from a roadside bomb in Afghanistan that stole his legs and a piece of his soul 7 years ago. Years of therapy hadn't restored full control of his body, but he'd learned to navigate pain with quiet grit and unshakable resolve. His face, usually unreadable, was alert today, not with excitement, but unease. Behind him walked Vanessa Walker, pushing the chair, mid-30s, tall, porcelain-skinned. Her jet-black hair was pulled into a tight bun, exposing the sharp angles of her jaw. She moved like someone who'd rehearsed every gesture, every smile. Her beauty was undeniable, but cold, like polished marble. Once a luxury realtor in Scottsdale, Vanessa had met Jake at a veterans fundraiser. The spark was brief. The wedding, quicker. Since then, her warmth had faded like snow under Arizona sun. Jake began to suspect she hadn't fallen for the man, but for his monthly pension and the sprawling mountain property left to him by his grandfather. Vanessa's grip on the wheelchair handles tightened as they neared a section of the trail where the trees fell away, revealing a steep drop. "Almost there," she said, her voice flat. Jake squinted ahead. "You sure this is safe? These trails get narrow near the edge." "It's fine," she cut in. "You always wanted to see the sunrise from Widow's Peak. Consider it your anniversary gift." Jake let the silence settle. Something about her tone. It wasn't cruel, but it was hollow, like she wasn't really there. Back at the lodge, tied to a short lead on the porch post, was Ghost, a 6-year-old German shepherd, broad-shouldered and lean, with a deep sable coat flecked in ash gray and rust. His amber eyes mirrored every flicker of Jake's emotions. Ghost had once sniffed out explosives in hostile territory. Now, under Vanessa's rules, he wasn't even allowed inside. No dogs in the kitchen, no dogs on the couch, no dogs upstairs. She'd drawn the line everywhere. But Ghost remembered, and he disobeyed in silence. That morning, as soon as Vanessa wheeled Jake out of the yard, Ghost began to whimper. The moment she was out of sight, he yanked hard. The old rope creaked once, then snapped. Ghost tore through the orchard like a shadow, nose low, paws silent on dew-soaked grass, cutting through trails he knew by instinct. Up ahead, Jake's chair jolted slightly as the gravel thinned. The drop beside them loomed sharp and sudden, the pine canopy falling away into a yawning void of mist and stone. Jake gripped the armrests. "Vanessa, this is close enough." She didn't stop. Her eyes stayed locked on the horizon, where the sun now crowned the ridge in defiant gold. Just a few more feet. "Vanessa, you know it's funny," she said, and for the first time that morning she smiled. But it was the kind of smile that chilled bone. This was never supposed to be a life sentence. The marriage, the chair, the dog, the pity. She exhaled slowly. "I gave it a shot, Jake. I really did." Jake felt the tremor in her voice. But it wasn't sadness. It was something darker. He turned in the chair, trying to see her face, but she leaned forward suddenly and grabbed both armrests. Ghost burst through the tree line. He was 10 yards away when he saw them, his human perched on the edge of oblivion, and Vanessa, shoulders tense, hands white-knuckled. He barked once, loud, sharp, desperate. Vanessa hesitated, but only for a second. Her hands released the brake. Jake's chair lurched. "No!" he shouted. The gravel beneath the front wheels crumbled. Jake's body pitched forward, weightless. Ghost lunged, claws tearing at the earth as he sprinted, but he was too far, too late. There was no scream, just the metallic echo of wheels spinning into nothing and the whisper of wind against flesh. Vanessa straightened, wiped her palms on her leggings, and turned. Ghost skidded to a halt, nails scraping rock. He ran to the edge and growled, barking into the void, his ears pinned back, eyes wild. Vanessa glanced over her shoulder, startled. Their eyes met, and for a brief, flickering second, Ghost's body trembled, not with fear, with rage. Vanessa turned quickly, nearly slipping as she rushed down the trail. She didn't look back. The path home was familiar. So was her next move. Call the local VA clinic. Say Jake had an episode and left early for treatment in Portland. No one would question her. Not with her voice so calm, her face so perfectly composed, her story so clearly rehearsed. Behind her, hidden by the trees and low clouds, Ghost stayed at the cliff's edge, barking into the sky as the wind began to howl. The sky over Bend, Oregon had started to change, darkening at the edges like a spreading bruise. The wind picked up, teasing the pine needles into whispering secrets. Morning light filtered through the clouds, painting the Cascades in muted silver. The birds had gone silent. Something in the air felt off balance, as if the mountains themselves had sensed betrayal. Below the precipice at Widow's Peak, Jake Walker lay crumpled against a jagged outcropping of rock. His wheelchair had miraculously wedged between two craggy spires. The fall had bruised his ribs and torn open an old scar on his shoulder. Blood matted the sleeve of his jacket, and his lips had gone pale with shock. But he was breathing, still alive, still tethered to the world by threads of pain and defiance. He couldn't feel his legs. He never could. But now, worse, he could barely move his torso. His back throbbed from the violent jolt of the halted fall. Each breath came in short, shallow gasps. A gull cried overhead. The scent of dirt and iron hung thick in the air. "Ghost!" he croaked, his voice thin, barely louder than the wind rustling through the canyon pines. "Ghost!" Above him, the German shepherd paced the cliff's edge, tail high, ears twitching, eyes locked on the drop. Ghost barked once, twice, then spun and bolted back the way they had come. The lodge wasn't far. Less than half a mile through a narrow switchback that twisted past the old orchard and down into the lower pasture. Ghost tore through it like a streak of shadow, leaping fallen logs, ignoring the thorns that raked his flanks. Gravel crackled under his paws. His breath came heavy, but his focus never wavered. Inside the modest ranch house that sat beside the lodge, Sam Carter had just poured his second cup of black coffee. He stood barefoot in the open doorway, tall and wiry, in a worn gray Henley and faded jeans. His hair was cropped short, silver already threading at the temples. His hands, strong, calloused, carried the history of both combat and hard ranch work. Sam had been Jake's team leader back in Afghanistan. After they were discharged, he became caretaker of the Walker property. Loyalty came easy to him, until Vanessa moved in. From the start, Sam hadn't trusted her. She was all diamonds and detachment, polite to everyone but never warm, her smile more rehearsed than real. Jake deserved more than someone who spoke to him like he was a burden. Still, Sam had kept his opinions to himself. That morning he'd seen Vanessa return alone, dust on her leggings, a faraway look in her eyes. When he'd asked where Jake was, she muttered something about early rehab and disappeared inside. Now he heard frantic barking. Ghost barreled across the gravel and skidded to a stop at Sam's feet, tongue lolling, chest heaving with urgency. Without hesitation, Ghost bit at Sam's sleeve and tugged hard. "What the hell, boy?" Sam dropped his mug, the ceramic shattering on the porch. "Ghost, what's going on?" Ghost growled and pulled again, more insistent this time. His amber eyes, almost human, held something Sam couldn't ignore. Desperation. Sam stepped down into the grass, letting the dog lead. Ghost took off, glancing back constantly to make sure Sam was following. Sam grabbed a flashlight and a first aid kit from the porch wall, laced up his boots in seconds, and jogged after him. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. He felt it before he saw anything. The trail narrowed as they climbed. Ghost veered left past a row of old-growth pines, leading him into the clearing at Widow's Peak. Sam stopped dead as the horizon opened before him. His breath caught. The earth near the cliff was disturbed. Two parallel grooves were etched into the loose dirt wheelchair tracks. They ran straight toward the edge. "Oh, God," he whispered. Ghost whined low, then barked again, loud, sharp. Sam crept forward, heart pounding. He dropped to his knees and peered over the lip of the cliff. For a moment, there was nothing but rock and air. Then, just below, a flicker of movement, a glint of metal, a figure. "Jake!" he shouted, his voice cracking. A pause, then, faint as the breeze. "Sam!" Sam's eyes widened. "Jesus, you're alive!" "I can't move." Jake's voice was ragged. "Chair's stuck. I don't know how long." "I've got you," Sam said, already pulling his phone from his pocket. No signal. Of course not. This ridge had always been a dead zone. He shoved the phone back in and looked at Ghost. "Stay. Watch him." Ghost stepped to the edge, lay down, and peered below, letting out a long, mournful whine. Sam scanned the terrain. He couldn't climb down safely without gear. Not yet, but he could run to the barn. There was an old coil of climbing rope, some harnesses left over from their training days, if they were still intact. He turned and sprinted. Ghost stayed put, body tense, eyes never leaving Jake, as if his presence alone could hold his friend in place. By the time Sam reached the barn, the sky had shifted from pale gray to the color of bruised steel. Clouds gathered fast over the Cascades, swirling like a slow, inevitable reckoning. The scent of ozone filled the air, thick, sharp. The barn sat on the western edge of the Walker property, an old wooden structure with a sagging roof and peeling red paint, but solid where it mattered. Inside, dust swirled in the shafts of light spilling through gaps in the siding. Sam moved fast. He climbed over an overturned wheelbarrow and headed for a locked supply cabinet at the back wall. He hadn't opened it in years. When Jake first came home after the blast, they'd trained together again, just to feel movement, to feel normal. Some of the old gear had been left behind. Sam reached for the padlock, fingers trembling, then drove his boot into the latch. It snapped. Inside, coiled beneath a tarp, lay a harness, a belay device, and a length of climbing rope, frayed in places, but still strong enough to save a life. He took everything he needed in one sweep. The air felt heavier around him as the wind outside picked up. Leaves swirled across the yard, whispering secrets he didn't want to hear. Sam Carter tossed the rescue gear into the bed of his Ford pickup and tore out of the gravel drive, tires spitting dust as the first drops of rain splattered across the windshield. Back at the Walker estate, Vanessa Walker stood before a wide bathroom mirror applying mascara with calculated precision. Her reflection was flawless. Dark eyes, sharp lines, crimson lips, without a trace of worry. She had already made the call to Jake's physical therapist in Portland, claiming her husband had been transferred early that morning for a last-minute extended treatment plan. Her voice had been calm, even concerned. She played her role with grace. Now she was dressed in a charcoal pencil skirt and a cream silk blouse that hugged her figure, black heels clicking softly across the marble floor. There was no panic in her step. The wheelchair's travel cover was already folded and tucked neatly back in the garage. She was headed to the office of Thad Jennings, a probate lawyer in downtown Bend. Vanessa had worked with Thad once before when helping a client close on a property. He was in his late 50s, always wore a vest no matter the weather, and spoke with the slow confidence of a man who'd seen every trick in the book. By the time she arrived, the rain was falling steadily. She walked under a black umbrella, designer purse swinging at her side. The building was a small brick colonial wedged between a bakery and a barber shop. Inside, her heels tapped lightly on polished hardwood. Thad looked up from behind his oak desk, raising a gray brow. "Mrs. Walker, didn't expect to see you today. Everything all right?" She smiled politely. "Of course. I just wanted to go over Jake's trust again. We discussed making some adjustments in case, circumstances changed." Thad closed his ledger and folded his hands. "You mean if he passes?" She gave a tight nod. "Or is declared missing. I've been told certain clauses can be triggered without a death certificate, given time." His gaze sharpened. "Forgive me, but isn't Jake due for a checkup today? I thought he had another 6 months of rehab left." "He was moved this morning to Portland for specialized care," she replied quickly. "There was a change in his treatment plan. I didn't have time to notify everyone." "And he authorized that?" Thad's voice was neutral, but probing. "He's been struggling," she said, adding a subtle tremble. "Mentally, he needed a break." Thad leaned back slowly. "You'll need medical records, Vanessa. Signed forms, witness transfers. If we're going to act on any clause in the trust, especially anything involving disbursement, we'll need more than your word." She smiled again, cooler this time. "Of course, I'm working on getting everything sent over. I just wanted to be proactive." Thad didn't return the smile. He watched her leave, eyes narrowing slightly as the door clicked shut. Back on the mountain trail, Sam pulled his truck onto the shoulder and jogged the last stretch toward Widow's Peak. The rain had thickened into a misting sheet, thunder grumbling in the distance. Ghost was still at the cliff's edge, tail curled, soaked to the bone but unmoving. He rose to meet Sam with a short bark, then returned to his perch, eyes locked on the drop. "Good boy," Sam muttered, laying the gear out in the grass. His hands moved fast, clipping carabiners, checking knots. The rope was old, but he doubled it up. He wasn't about to gamble with Jake's life. He slipped into the harness, gritting his teeth against the cold rain, soaking his collar and sleeves. The rock was slick, the dirt soft and muddy. He looped the belay around the thick pine trunk and tested the tension. It held. "Hold the line, Ghost," he whispered as he backed toward the edge. He descended slowly, boots finding shallow toe holds as he rappelled down. Each yard felt like a mile. Water streamed down the cliffside in thin rivulets, making the stone feel alive and shivering. Lightning forked across the sky behind him, illuminating the gray world in sharp relief. When he reached the outcropping, he saw Jake slumped against a boulder, lips cracked, skin pale. Jake's eyes fluttered open as Sam dropped beside him. "Back already?" Jake rasped. "Shut up," Sam said, kneeling to check his pulse. "You're lucky you're not dead. Hold still." Above them, Ghost barked again, a sharp, proud cry. Sam pulled a thermal blanket from his belt pouch and tucked it around Jake. He clicked his radio. Static. No signal. "You're gonna be fine," he muttered. "I've got you." The rain intensified, sheets of water hammering the rocks. Sam tightened the straps around Jake and clipped the second rope to his harness. "This'll be the worst elevator ride of your life, brother." He looked up into the blur of gray above. Ghost's silhouette waited, unwavering, the only clear shape against the storm. Rain ran in rivulets down Sam's brow as he crouched beside Jake on the narrow ledge, the wind whipping at them with brutal insistence. The storm roared against the mountainside like some ancient fury. Jake lay crumpled on his side, wrapped in the thermal blanket, face pale, lips tinged blue. Every breath was shallow, rasping, but his eyes, though dulled, still held defiance. Sam's fingers worked quickly. Years of training and tactical extractions came rushing back as muscle memory. He clipped carabiners to the harness around Jake's torso and thighs, reinforced the knots, and checked the tension line twice. "Can you move your arms?" he asked without looking up. "Left one," Jake muttered. "Right's dead weight right now." "That's enough. Just keep that brain working. All right. You pass out on me, and I'll make you climb back up yourself." A weak laugh escaped Jake Walker, followed by a cough that rattled deep in his chest. Above them, Ghost's silhouette appeared in jagged flashes of lightning. The German shepherd paced along the cliff's edge, barking sharp, guttural encouragements. Rain soaked through his coat, but he stood firm, paws braced in the mud, eyes locked on the rescue below. He didn't whine. He didn't panic. He knew the drill. Ghost had been trained for high-stress operations. 6 years old, but carrying himself like a seasoned veteran, broad chest, intelligent eyes, dark sable fur bristling with resolve. Sam Carter gave a final tug on the harness. "All right, brother. Time to get you out of hell again." Using the pulley system he'd hastily rigged from spare climbing rope, Sam braced himself against a rocky outcrop and began the slow ascent, hauling Jake inch by agonizing inch. The injured man groaned with every jolt, teeth clenched against the pain. Mud sloshed around Sam's boots, the weight of the climb dragging against his spine. Halfway up, the wind shifted. A bolt of lightning split the sky overhead, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the mountainside. A small landslide of wet pebbles cascaded past Sam's shoulder, missing him by inches. He paused, bracing them both against the wall, breath-catching. "Still with me?" "Barely," Jake whispered. Sam grunted and kept climbing. Meanwhile, across the property, deep inside the main lodge, Maria Alvarez stood alone in the hallway, her hand hovering over the kitchen trash bin. In her 60s, short and round, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose braid. Her olive-toned skin had weathered over the years, but her brown eyes were still sharp, always catching what others missed. She'd worked at the Walker estate for more than a decade, long before Vanessa arrived. It was Vanessa's absence that morning that raised her suspicion. Too quiet. No breakfast orders. No music from her room. Then she noticed the trash. Torn paper, smudged ink. Maria didn't pry often, but something about the mess of shredded pages made her pause. She lifted a scrap from the top of the bin, unfolding it carefully. A printed letterhead from St. Agnes Rehabilitation Center. Her eyes widened. It was a treatment plan, but dated yesterday, and the signature line, scrawled hastily, read Dr. S. Carrion. Maria's brows knit together. She'd seen Dr. Carrion's real signature on official mail before. This one was wrong, too rushed, slanted differently. Frowning, she gathered the remaining scraps and slipped them into a freezer bag. She grabbed her raincoat from the back door and stepped outside, mind racing. Her niece Teresa worked part-time at the Bend City Clerk's office, a sharp young woman who once mentioned how forgery checks were processed. If anyone could verify this without raising alarms, it was her. Thunder rolled across the property as Maria climbed into her aging Toyota Corolla and turned the ignition. Back at the cliff, Sam's fingers ached from the strain. Jake's weight dragged hard against the line, and the rain showed no mercy. At last, Sam's gloved hands reached the final anchor. With one last surge, he pulled Jake fully onto the plateau. Ghost rushed in immediately, circling them, whining softly, then licking Jake's face in short, urgent strokes. "Good boy," Jake muttered. Sam collapsed beside them, chest heaving. He pulled a second thermal blanket from his pack and wrapped it around Jake. "We're not out yet. We've got to get you to the truck." He glanced at Ghost. "Stay close. Watch the rear." The dog fell in behind without hesitation. Sam wrapped his arms under Jake's torso and, grunting with effort, lifted him into a fireman's carry. Jake winced and groaned, but didn't protest. Ghost moved beside them, ears alert, scanning the woods. The trail back would be treacherous, mud, roots, lightning, but Sam didn't hesitate. He'd carried Jake through worse. They disappeared into the mist and rain, three shadows moving together toward the faint promise of light beyond the trees. The emergency room at St. Charles Medical Center in Bend glowed under sterile white lights, humming with quiet urgency. Nurses in navy scrubs moved like whispers across the linoleum floors, faces composed, voices calm. The storm outside had passed, but the scent of wet pine still clung to those who'd walked in from it. Jake Walker was wheeled in by Sam, his unconscious body limp beneath layers of soaked thermal blankets. Blood stained the corner of his jacket, his face a pale canvas of exhaustion and trauma. Sam limped behind the stretcher, boots muddy, shirt plastered to his chest. He didn't say much, just barked. Marine vet, spinal injury, possible hypothermia, head trauma, before stepping aside to let the staff swarm. Ghost followed close, wet fur matted, ears pinned back, eyes burning with silent desperation. The security guard at the entrance started to block the dog, but Sam stepped between them. "He stays," Sam growled. "He's not a pet. That dog's half the reason that man's still breathing." Reluctantly, the nurse on duty nodded. Ghost settled beside the stretcher, dripping water across the polished floor, gaze never leaving Jake. Down the hall, Vanessa Walker stood in a marbled waiting area, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her white blouse was pristine, tucked neatly into slacks that hadn't seen dirt in weeks. Her dark hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, heels clicking lightly against the tile as she paced. She had arrived only moments earlier, feigning shock after receiving a call from a hospital staffer saying her husband had been found injured near their property. She had driven in silence, rehearsing grief. The door opened, and a police officer stepped in, Detective Janelle Hart. Early 40s, tall and angular, deep brown skin, short curly hair, tucked under a Bend PD cap. Detective Janelle Hart was a veteran of the Bend Police Department, known for her restraint and razor-sharp perception. She approached Vanessa Walker slowly, taking in the woman's posture, the measured smoothness of her voice. "I understand your husband was scheduled to begin treatment in Portland," Hart said evenly. Vanessa blinked. "Yes, he left yesterday morning. I didn't expect to hear from anyone until today." "And you didn't accompany him?" "He insisted on going alone," Vanessa replied, her tone calm but just a shade too smooth. "He needed space. He's been distant lately." Hart scribbled a note in her pad. And you didn't think to call the center when he didn't check in? Vanessa hesitated. I assumed he arrived. Hart nodded slowly, her eyes searching. In the ER, Ghost suddenly growled. The shepherd's entire body went rigid as Vanessa stepped into the trauma bay. His fur bristled, lips peeling back over his teeth. A low, guttural sound echoed off the white walls. The nurses froze. Ghost stepped between Vanessa and Jake's hospital bed, tail stiff, muscles tight, eyes narrowed. Call him off, Vanessa snapped, stepping back. From the corner, Sam Carter raised a brow. That's not how he works. He's trained to detect threats. The lead nurse glanced from the dog to Jake, then back. This is a medical zone. If the animal's reacting like that, there's probably a reason. Ghost lunged, not to attack, but to plant himself directly beside Jake, his body arched protectively. His eyes never left Vanessa. Hart entered then, catching the tail end of the scene. She watched the dog for a long beat, then turned to Vanessa. Looks like someone's got a sense about you. Vanessa's smile faltered for just a breath. Elsewhere, under the dripping forest canopy, Officer Cole Renner examined the trail leading toward Widow's Peak. Late 30s, stocky build, weathered face under a sweat-stained tan baseball cap. His uniform was damp from the drizzle that hadn't quite let go. He knelt at the cliff's edge, flashlight beam grazing over two parallel grooves. Distinct, clean, unmistakable. Wheelchair tracks. The soil was disturbed. The grooves didn't veer or turn. They ended at the edge. Renner's partner, a younger officer named Diaz, approached. You think he fell? Renner shook his head. Doesn't look like a fall. Looks like he was pushed. Want me to report it in? Renner stood slowly, wiping dirt from his glove. Not yet. Let's keep it close until we know what the chief wants. Back at the hospital, Vanessa sat stiffly in the waiting room, the storm of the dog's reaction still replaying in her head. Her fingers tapped nervously on her knee, heel bouncing against the floor. She hadn't slept well in days. Ever since the morning she'd returned from the cliff, she'd started seeing Ghost in her dreams, watching her, sometimes barking, sometimes growling, sometimes silent and still as a statue, but always accusing. Now, even when she closed her eyes in daylight, his gaze followed her. In the trauma bay, Jake stirred. His eyelids fluttered open under the harsh fluorescent lights. A heart monitor beeped softly beside him. He blinked slowly, dry lips parting. Ghost whined softly, placing a paw gently on the side of the bed. Sam leaned closer. Jake, you with me? Jake's voice was barely audible. Ghost. I'm here, Sam said quickly. We got you out. Jake's brow furrowed. She pushed me. Sam's jaw clenched. We figured. A quiet shuffle behind the curtain, and Detective Hart stepped in. She stood silently at first, letting the words hang, then retrieved her notepad. Jake turned his head slowly, weak but focused. It wasn't an accident. I didn't fall. Who did it? Hart asked, her tone soft but firm. Jake's eyes closed briefly, then opened. Vanessa. Ghost let out a low growl, as if confirming the name. Hart wrote without expression. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Outside, lightning had faded to memory, but the wind still whispered through the eaves like a warning. Ben's dawn rose behind a veil of low-hanging fog, pale light seeping into the pine-shrouded hills, like a secret trying to surface. The hospital sat quiet but tense, a hum of restrained activity beneath the fluorescent lights. In room 214, Jake Walker lay propped up slightly by pillows, a faint blush of color returning to his cheeks. His bandaged head bore the angry mark of a gash just above the brow, and a monitor beeped steadily beside him. At his feet, Ghost lay curled with one ear perked, half asleep but never fully resting. Jake stared out the window, his thoughts far from the room, returning again and again to the moment Vanessa's hands left the back of his chair, the raw betrayal, the absence of hesitation, the cold. Sam entered quietly, holding 2 coffees, dressed in a gray zip-up and jeans. His broad shoulders were tense, despite the casual clothes. His salt and pepper hair was still damp from an early walk with Ghost. Still no sleep? Sam asked, handing him a cup. Jake gave a half-smile. Hard to sleep when your last nap almost became permanent. Sam chuckled darkly. That's one way to say it. Moments later, the door creaked again. Maria Alvarez, the longtime housekeeper at the Walker estate, stepped in cautiously. Late 50s, small and wiry, olive-toned skin, long gray-black hair tied in a tight braid. Years of labor and silence had built a quiet strength in her. Her dark, sharp eyes darted between Jake and Sam. "Mr. Jake," she said softly, "I have something you need to see." She held out a plain manila envelope. Inside were several printed pages, doctored medical documents Jake didn't recognize, but bearing his forged signature. And more damning still, a printed transcript of a voicemail Maria had secretly recorded just days earlier. "She left this on my phone by accident. Or maybe she thought I couldn't understand her," Maria said, "but I did, every word." Sam scanned the sheet, his eyes widening. "When he dies, I'll be the one to sign the documents." "Jesus!" Maria nodded. She said it like it was done, like she'd already buried you. Her coat collar was turned up against the cold, fingers strumming softly against her notepad. Detective Janelle Hart had already gotten word from Officer Cole Renner about the wheelchair tracks at Widow's Peak. Now, with Maria Alvarez's envelope in hand, she had everything she needed. That night, at exactly 9:42 p.m., a Bend PD cruiser rolled up the long gravel driveway of the Walker estate. Inside, Vanessa Walker lounged in the study, sipping white wine in a navy silk robe, scrolling through her phone as if nothing in her world had come undone. She barely looked up when the knock came. "Officers," she said, standing tall, chin tilted, voice a purr. "If this is about Jake, I already told." Hart stepped forward. "Vanessa Walker, you are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and falsification of legal documents." Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me." Her voice stayed composed, but a tremor tugged at the corners of her mouth. "This is ridiculous. You have no proof." Hart handed her the printed voicemail transcript and the forged medical plans. "These say otherwise." Maria stood just behind the officers, arms folded. Vanessa's eyes met hers. No hatred, just disbelief at being outplayed. The handcuffs clicked shut around Vanessa's wrists. Her smirk faded. "You can't do this. I haven't done anything." "You did plenty," Hart replied. They walked her out into the cold Oregon night, past the statue-still pines, the wind whistling like judgment. No reporters, no neighbors, just the silence of justice being carried out. Meanwhile, at the Oregon Veterans Recovery Center in Bend, Jake Walker was transferred to a private recovery suite reserved for high-profile injuries. The center was clean and warm, decorated with American flags and handwritten notes from schoolchildren pinned to bulletin boards. His lead therapist, Dr. Tamara Connors, a woman in her early 40s with russet curls tucked into a loose bun, was known for being both stern and intuitive. She studied Jake's chart. "Trauma, spinal damage, but stable. You're lucky." "I don't feel lucky," Jake muttered. "You should," she said. "That dog saved your life." Ghost lifted his head at the sound of her voice. She leaned down and scratched behind his ears. "Official policy says no animals in recovery," she said simply, "but he stays." From the corner, Sam Carter gave a small nod. "He's not just a dog. He's the whole damn story." By morning, local news outlets had the story. The Bend Bulletin headline read, "Veteran thrown off cliff survives thanks to loyal dog." It spread faster than wildfire in August. Within hours, national blogs picked it up. Hashtags trended. Hashtag host the hero. Hashtag justice for Jake. #K9 saves Marine. The betrayal was shocking, but what gripped people was Ghost, the war dog turned companion who refused to let go. Veteran support groups reposted the article. Former Marines and Army officers sent letters to the hospital. Even a retired general wrote to commend Jake's resilience. One young nurse, Haley Prescott, brought in a folded American flag and set it on the windowsill beside Jake's bed. "For him," she said, nodding toward Ghost, "because he served too." Jake looked at her, emotion swelling behind tired eyes. "Thank you." Ghost nuzzled the flag gently with his nose. A pale light filtered through the windows of Deschutes County Courthouse, glinting off polished wood and casting long shadows across the marble floor. Snow had started falling again that morning, dusting the steps like a quiet reckoning. Inside courtroom 4B, the gallery was packed. Reporters, veterans, townsfolk, some in uniform, some with service dogs of their own. They came not just to witness justice, but to honor something deeper: resilience, loyalty, truth. Jake sat near the front in his wheelchair, dressed in a dark navy suit that hung a little loose on his once broader frame. He looked pale, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with calm precision. Ghost sat at his side, posture rigid, brown-black fur freshly brushed, service vest snug around his muscular frame. His ears twitched at every shuffle, but his gaze stayed locked on the defense table. Vanessa Walker sat there with her arms folded tightly across her chest. No silk robe, no wine glass, just a standard charcoal gray pantsuit. Her golden hair was pulled back in a sharp ponytail. Her makeup was flawless, but fatigue showed in her eyes. She looked thinner, as if the weight of her own secrets had been eating her alive. Presiding was the Honorable Martha Redcliffe, a firm but fair judge in her late 60s. Tall, commanding, silver hair in a tight bun, she was known statewide for her sharp mind and zero tolerance for theatrics. She peered over her spectacles and nodded toward the prosecutor. "You may call your witness." Jake wheeled forward with Sam at his side. Sam leaned in and whispered, "You got this, brother," before taking a seat behind him. Jake adjusted the mic. "My name is Jake Walker. I served in the United States Marine Corps until I was injured in Fallujah. After returning home, I married Vanessa, and I thought we had a life." He paused, voice steady but carrying a quiet ache. "On the morning of March 5th, Vanessa offered to take me on a walk for our anniversary. We went to Windfall Bluff, a place I loved. As we got near the edge, I noticed her demeanor had changed, cold, distant. In the gallery, people leaned in. Ghost raised his head. She wheeled me to the edge. I remember her hands on the back of the chair. Then she let go. The courtroom went utterly still. I fell, but not far. The wheelchair lodged between rocks. I was alive, trapped. Ghost had followed us. He saw everything. He barked until someone came." The prosecutor nodded. "Do you recognize that someone in this courtroom?" "Yes," Jake said, gesturing. "Sam Carter, my friend. He and Ghost saved my life." Sam was called next, standing tall in a black shirt tucked into worn jeans, ready to tell his part of the story. Sam Carter spoke with the conviction of a man who'd lived through things he never thought he'd speak of in public. "I found him down there. I heard his voice. If Ghost hadn't come for me, I never would have gone up that trail." Maria Alvarez was next. She stepped forward in a dark green blouse and long skirt, her silver braid tucked neatly beneath a wool scarf. She carried herself with grace, but there was an unmistakable air of personal betrayal in her eyes. "I worked for the Walker family for 8 years. I trusted Mrs. Vanessa, but I found documents in the trash, faked medical letters with forged signatures. Then I heard her voicemail. I gave those to the authorities. I couldn't stay silent." Lastly, Dr. Tamara Connors took the stand. Her testimony was crisp and clinical, a detailed report of Jake Walker's medical state, and a professional confirmation that his fall was deliberate, based on the injuries and witness accounts. When the defense attorney called Vanessa Walker, she was reluctant, fidgeting with her cuffs before finally taking the stand. Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to. I was overwhelmed. He was always broken, always needing care. I thought maybe the insurance could help him get better treatment." The room tensed. Judge Martha Redcliffe tilted her head, unimpressed. "Or perhaps you thought he'd die and you'd collect the money." Vanessa blinked rapidly, lips trembling. "I loved him once." The silence that followed was damning. Then, something unexpected happened. Judge Redcliffe called for a brief recess, but before anyone moved, she looked at Ghost. "I understand the dog has become central to this case," she said, removing her glasses. "Not just emotionally, but practically. I've reviewed the paperwork submitted by Dr. Connors and the Veteran Center." She turned toward Jake. "Mr. Walker, I hereby declare your service dog, Ghost, an official emotional support animal under state law. He may accompany you to any public or private space necessary." A ripple of quiet applause spread through the courtroom. Jake leaned down and patted Ghost gently. The dog pressed his head into Jake's chest and let out a soft huff. The final verdict came an hour later. Judge Redcliffe's voice was unwavering. "Vanessa Walker, you are hereby sentenced to the maximum term allowable under Oregon law for attempted murder, fraud, and criminal falsification. May justice serve as a mirror to your actions." Vanessa didn't scream, she didn't protest. She simply stood, knees trembling, and allowed herself to be handcuffed. For the first time, a tear slipped down her cheek, but it came far too late. Outside, the crowd waited. As Jake was wheeled out of the courthouse with Ghost at his side, people rose to their feet in applause. A few saluted. Some clapped. Others simply whispered, "That's the dog," and nodded with deep respect. Jake looked out over the crowd. He didn't smile. Instead, he closed his eyes, reached down, and wrapped both arms around Ghost's neck. The dog stood perfectly still, eyes closed, leaning into the man he had never stopped protecting. The wind and bend had softened. The late spring sun painted the sky in shades of peach and rose as it dipped behind the Cascades. A dirt road led up to a modest wooden cabin perched above a field of wildflowers, the kind of home built not with wealth, but with love, patience, and calloused hands. No gates, no high walls, just a simple porch, a ramp leading to the door, and the steady sound of wind chimes clinking like distant laughter. Jake sat on the porch in his wheelchair, wrapped in a flannel blanket, a mug of lukewarm coffee resting in his hand. His hair had grown a bit longer, and the beard he once kept shaved was now full and silvering at the chin. The deep lines on his face told of both pain and survival. But his eyes, sharp, bright, unshaken, reflected a man who had walked through fire and found his way back. Beside him, Ghost lay with his head resting gently on Jake's thigh. The shepherd's coat glistened in the evening light, healed from old scratches and scars, muscles taut beneath the fur. He was no longer confined to the cold porch of the old estate. Now he had a large doghouse right beside Jake's bedroom window, where he slept, but rarely stayed. His place was next to Jake, always. The cabin had been a gift. After Vanessa's conviction, word of the trial spread far beyond Oregon. Donations poured in from veterans, groups, local carpenters, and strangers across the state. Sam Carter took charge of the construction, refusing payment. He showed up every morning in worn boots and a tool belt, hammering and sawing alongside anyone who came to help. Now Sam came by most evenings, always with a six-pack and a story. On this particular day he was late. Jake didn't mind. He enjoyed the quiet. The way the porch creaked under the weight of memory and renewal, the chirps of birds in the distance, and the constant presence of Ghost. Inside the house, on the living room wall, hung a small frame, a photograph of Jake in uniform, arms around his Marine brothers, Ghost, still a young pup in training, by his side. Below it was another photo taken just last week, Jake holding a boy in his arms while Ghost sat close, tongue hanging, ears perked. The boy's name was Carter. 7 years old, living with cerebral palsy, and wearing an impossibly bright smile. He was part of a local therapy group for children of veterans. His mother, Alicia, was a single mom who worked at the town library. Mid-30s, petite, with curly chestnut hair, always pulled into a bun and reading glasses that never seemed to stay put on her nose. Quiet and observant, Alicia had first brought Carter to the group reluctantly, unsure how it fit in. But the moment Carter saw Ghost, something shifted. The boy reached out, wobbly, uncertain, and Ghost, as if understanding everything, walked gently up and nuzzled his hand. From that day on, Carter called Ghost his guardian ranger. Jake had taken a liking to Carter quickly. At first, he wasn't sure how to talk to kids, especially one with medical needs. But Carter's unfiltered questions and laughter melted those doubts. They played simple games in the backyard garden. Ghost let young Carter toss sticks, though he rarely chased them. Instead, he'd nudge them back with his nose, so the boy could try again. "Carter's gonna be the next little warrior," Jake Walker had said during one of the therapy sessions. "He's braver than I ever was." The therapy group had welcomed Jake and Ghost with open arms. Dr. Margot Lennox, a trauma specialist in her early 50s with kind eyes and a fondness for floral scarves, invited them every week to share stories with veterans battling PTSD. Ghost had become something of a legend in those circles. Calming, attentive, and attuned to invisible wounds, many called him the four-legged therapist. Not long ago, a grizzled Vietnam vet named Joseph, always withdrawn, always standing apart, had burst into tears after Ghost quietly sat beside him without being called. "I haven't let anyone touch me in 20 years, he whispered, scratching behind Ghost's ear. Back on the porch, the golden light was fading. Jake took a deep, full breath. "It doesn't hurt to breathe anymore. Not like it used to." He reached down and scratched Ghost behind the neck. "You knew before I did that something was wrong," he murmured. "You always did." Ghost's ears flicked in acknowledgement. A moment later, the front gate creaked and Sam Carter came up the path carrying 2 grocery bags and a worn leather journal under his arm. "You're late," Jake said with a grin. "I was collecting more fan mail," Sam replied, tossing the journal into Jake's lap. A dozen more letters from high school kids who read the story. One of them wants to write a report on ghosts for class. Jake chuckled. He better get my name right, too. As the two men laughed, the sky deepened. Stars began to appear like pinpricks in velvet. Ghost shifted, laying his full weight against Jake's feet. Sam stood, looking out over the hills. Crazy how things change. A year ago, I thought I'd be burying you. You almost did, Jake said softly, but you didn't. Silence fell between them again, this time a comfortable one. After Sam went inside to make dinner, Jake stayed. Ghost didn't move. Together, they watched the last blush of daylight slip behind the Cascades. Jake spoke aloud, not to Sam, not to the world, but to something larger, deeper. I lost everything. My legs, my marriage, my pride. But God, you gave me this. You gave me a friend who never left, and a reason to live again. Ghost tilted his head slightly, pressing his nose against Jake's arm. And you, Jake whispered, you're more than a dog. You're a miracle. Sometimes God doesn't stop the storm. He walks with us through it. Jake had lost everything the world values. Strength, pride, even the ability to walk. But what he gained was far more powerful. A loyal friend, a renewed purpose, and a second chance at life. That is the quiet miracle so many of us overlook. Ghost wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that when others abandon us, God often sends help in the most unexpected forms. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a stranger. Maybe it's a dog. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, or simply type Amen to stand with Jake and Ghost in prayer. May God bless you and guide you through your own journey. Type Amen if you believe in second chances.